everyone. Welcome to another episode of Closing Strong. I'm Tara McGowan, founder and publisher of COURIER, and joined by my friend and Hopium Chronicles Substacker extraordinaire, Simon Rosenberg. We are less than 2 weeks out from this election. The anxiety is at peak levels, but also the good vibes and energy. There are millions of people voting, millions that have already voted across the country. So we are in the thick of it. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm good, and I'm really excited about our show today. Not only do we have our always interesting chat between us about our take on the election, but we're going to be joined by Cortez Masto, the senator from Nevada, to give us an update on the early vote and the campaign there. It's a state that's going to be critical to this election. And also by Ramsey Reid, who's a senior advisor at the DNC and campaign manager for their independent and third-party efforts. I'm really excited about that interview. They've done a phenomenal job this cycle, learning from our past mistakes, Tara, as you know. And so we've got a great show. Get ready, everybody. We're going to have a lot of fun. And, a few weeks out, this is going to be a very close election, and we got to work as hard as we can.
Days. We're in days now.
We're in days.
And my body is feeling it. So let's dive into it. I have been experiencing what I think so many of us deep in this work have been. This is my fourth presidential election cycle, working at it in some capacity between media and politics. It doesn't really ever get easier when we get down to this period of time where we just know that we just have to do all the things. There's never enough that we can be doing, and we can't also focus too much on the fear, anxiety, even though the stakes are so incredibly high. So that's why I'm always delighted to partner with you on this, Simon, since you bring the hope and the hopium. I think I need it more than ever this week for no good reason other than just
extra dose of
energy
hopium
is high on all of them. So what is, in your opinion?
Sure. Yeah.
What's the state of the race right now?
Yeah. And I'll say that, we have a phrase at Hopium, which is do more, worry less. I mean, it's, and I just counsel everybody that we should be doing a lot more and worrying a lot less in the next 13 days if we can. 3 points about the election I'll make today, Tara. One is the polling remains remarkably consistent and steady. Since the debate in early September, Kamala Harris went up by 2, 3, 4 points nationally. That's where the independent polling was 2 weeks ago. It's where it was last week. It's where it is this week. We've actually gotten in a lot of polling this week. None of the independent polling is showing any kind of movement towards Trump right now. And I think the movement towards Trump that tipped some of the averages over the weekend is coming entirely by a series of right-wing polls that are trying to move the averages. They've been successful. They did it successfully in 2022. But when you take those out and you look at independent polling, we're exactly where we were 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, which is we have a slight and modest lead. We're closer to 270 in the battlegrounds, I believe, and that, in the battleground states. And we also, her favorabilities are much higher than Trump's, which really matters to people making up their mind in the end. And we've now seen from recent polling that we've also caught up on the economy, which was an enormous achievement by this campaign, that we've made up so much ground on an issue that matters so much to voters. And so on the basic structure and fundamentals, I think we have a modest advantage going into these final days, but it's very modest and we have a lot of work to do. Second, early vote. The early vote is going to be very different than 2020 and 2022. It's a lot harder to analyze. 2020 was COVID year. I mean, massive numbers of people voted, outside the voting booth. It's very clear that a big chunk of the electorate is going to go back to election day voting this time, making the early vote a little bit harder to interpret. But the good news is so far is that we're doing really well in the early vote in Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and now Georgia. Georgia, they came out a little bit strong, but in the last few days, we've made up a lot of ground in Georgia. And the rest of the states, I would view them as being very competitive. And then third, and something that is the theme of our show, Tara, is about closing strong. I think we are now in the home stretch here. And I just still have more confidence we're going to be able to move the election towards us than they are towards them. Our ads are reaching more people. Our muscular grassroots is touching more voters, right? And also, I think something that I really want to get your reflections on, because I think this is really where I learned so much from you, is that I think the campaign is creating a far greater and more powerful spectacle in the final 2 weeks than the awful spectacle, the incredible ugliness that they're generating every day. And so I think in this other way that we touch voters with events where they're being covered in local media, right, by the by the local news stations and TV and newspapers and radio. I think we're executing at a far higher level than they are. And so for all those reasons, I remain optimistic that we're much more likely to move the election towards us than towards them.
Yeah, no, it has been really incredible and reassuring to see that, well, really to see the campaign everywhere. The Harris Walz campaign. I mean, we know this is a turnout election. Any of the anxiety I have and a lot of my peers and colleagues and friends have is because we know how close it is. And it really comes down to, are you calling, texting, postcarding every single person you know or people you know through other people in the battleground states that will decide this election? And so what the campaign is doing, and truly doing it at an incredible scale, is they are holding incredible rallies and events. We're seeing celebrities come out of the woodwork to show up at these rallies, and that creates more earned media attention. It creates more social content that moves organically. Eminem introduced President Obama at a big rally in Detroit this week with Alyssa Slotkin, who is the Democratic Senate candidate in Michigan, who's also in a competitive race. There's the campaign has announced rallies and concerts with Bruce Springsteen, a surprise female musician that they're running a contest for a big GOTV rally. Vice President Harris is going to be doing a rally with Colin Allred, who was on our program with us just a few weeks ago in Houston.
Yep.
So they are going to Texas, which also makes me feel really hopeful and confident that Texas is in play in this election for Democrat, both for a critical Senate seat, and Harris is performing well there. And so that has been incredible to see because the campaign really understands, and there's a lot of Obama campaign alumni. Jen O'Malley Dillon obviously is very, very involved at a senior level. David Plouffe came back to join as a senior advisor on the campaign. I know so many of my friends from my Obama alumni years that have come back to help with all of the ground game. And to your point, Simon, Democrats are running an unbelievable program for getting out the vote, being on the ground in these communities, running relational organizing programs, running field canvases, taking in phone banks. I think there was an amazing stat that they did 5 million calls last week. I think I maybe read that from you, Simon. Yeah. So they're not taking anything for granted. They're doing all of the things all of the time. And the contrast with the Trump campaign is very stark. They don't have the field operation in place, which is also why there is so much, excuse my language again, but fuckery on the other side, because they know that they have a better shot of winning if less people vote in many of these states and respects. Yep. And so all of the ways they try to chip away at that, whether it's going to be what we're talking about later with propping up third-party candidates that would only pull from Democrats or bring more votes out that wouldn't come out otherwise, or it's all of the unbelievable work Republicans and state legislatures are trying to do that thankfully are getting batted down by the courts in states like Nevada and Georgia and Arizona to try to set up essentially another big lie. So those are the things that do breed a lot of anxiety, but we actually have a real campaign on our side, a real movement, a real coalition. And I have enormous confidence in this campaign to deliver on that, because truly, if I were running that campaign, which thankfully I am not, I am very grateful for the people who are, I would be so obsessed with the notion of don't let any person who lives in those 7 battleground states ignore that this election is happening and ignore the incredible stakes of it. Because so many people don't vote or don't think that their vote matters. And so being everywhere all of the time, bringing in different trusted messengers like Republicans for Harris has been doing with our friend Olivia, who was on, like celebrities, like Eminem, and all of these different folks that are coming out, it all matters. And so I am really excited to see that. I think that they have just turned the volume up. And of course, I think still our very best messenger and ambassador on our side is Barack Obama. And he is on the trail nonstop right now. He's doing a rally with Bruce Springsteen in Atlanta tonight. He's going to be in Philly later this week. So this all matters. And all of that content that's generated from all of these events and rallies and conversations moving on platforms like TikTok and others, it is truly flooding the zone in a way where the competitive content on the other side is Trump cosplaying as a McDonald's worker. and, swaying on stage and saying ludicrous things and then saying incredibly serious, dangerous things like there's an enemy within. So I do hope that that contrast is just unavoidable to voters in the battleground states. And I think that the campaign's doing an excellent job at that.
Well, I talked to a major political operative who has a lot of money and does focus groups and polling. And he called me 10 days ago and said, we're starting to see now show up unprompted in our focus groups concerns, particularly from women, about Trump's instability, his being so unhinged. And this is coming unprompted, which, as you know, Tara, from being in the business, is an important sign, right? That things are showing up again and again and with enormous frequency without being prompted. And he said, I think something is starting to change in the race. I mean, his view, like we all have this nervousness. We don't really know where the race is. He said, I feel like somehow Trump is breaking through in a negative way. And I think when you look back over the last few weeks, my own view is that week of JD Vance of the vice presidential debate and the savage attack by Trump on FEMA about diverting resources from North Carolina to undocumented immigrants, I think that the campaign was caught a little flat-footed there for good reason, because the vice president had to go back and be vice president and go deal with a huge national crisis. I mean, we had two back-to-back, storms. The storm that hit North Carolina was the most serious natural event that had happened in North Carolina history. And the vice president had to leave the trail, and she had to go back and help run the country during a time of enormous crisis. And Trump took advantage of that in some of the most malevolent and dark ways you could possibly do by lying and undermining the ability of the government to actually reach people to make sure that they were okay. And I think that for a couple days that may have altered the race a little bit, that they got a little bit more vibey on their side and we were looking like we were sort of not together.
Well, they put Democrats on defense, right? We're
yeah.
winning when we're on offense, and they were somewhat successful in that.
And it was also deeply malicious and malevolent in the way that it happened. But I think that's now in the rearview mirror. I think that this sort of expanded campaign that you were describing, right, where we're firing on all cylinders with so many surrogates, where we're trying to reach every electorate, young Black men, young white women, right? Republicans in the suburbs. I mean, they're grabbing and fighting for every vote, rural voters, right? They put out a whole new rural vote initiative, and Governor Walz has been traveling and campaigning in rural parts of the states that he's been going into. It is a full court press. This is exactly what campaigns do that win, right? The way that we're closing. And I think the thing that we have to recognize as professionals, and this is your fourth cycle, this is my 10th presidential cycle, right? Is that, and I've been through this in every election since 1988, is that what I'm really impressed by is the scale and enormity of what they're doing, right? No one's ever had as much money as they've had, and they are putting all the money that we've raised for them to extraordinarily good use right now. No one has run the kind of spectacle, as I call it now, that we're seeing on the ground. And, hats off to Jen and to David and to everybody at the upper levels of this campaign for having the ambition and confidence to try to execute such an audacious closing plan, because this is audacious.
Well, just to push back a little bit, but I'm in agreement with you, is that the Obama campaigns did. We threw massive rallies. They were spectacles.
Yeah.
What's really incredible about this is that this campaign started this summer.
Right.
This is not a campaign that has been building for 2 years. Like, thank goodness there was continuity, right, with campaign staff, et cetera. But still, this is a different candidate with a different message and a different, that's what's really remarkable about it, is that it is truly a testament to how so many folks that are helping and showing up, and the celebrities and the influencers and the surrogates and everyone, they understand how serious this is and the consequences of this election on our country, our democracy, and real people's lives. And so that's what blows my mind, is that they are running Obama-sized rallies and events and getting massive, massive attention, and also doing it in a way that is so, so, so tailored to the internet, the way that it runs today. That makes me really delighted. So.
Well, let's do an example of that, right? In Madison, Wisconsin, Governor Walz, who's not been breaking through into the news recently, broke through in a really powerful way.
By saying what we were all thinking?
Well, look, I'm not going to waste all the time I'm in. I'm going to talk about his running mate. His running mate, Elon Seriously. Where is Senator Vance after he got asked the simplest question in the world at the debate? Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And after 2 weeks, he finally said, no, he didn't. That's where he's been spending his time. But that's it. So, look, Elon's on that stage, jumping around, skipping like a dipshit on these things. You know it.
Let's just all acknowledge that the concept of Elon, the dancing dipshit, is going to be a lasting thing that we'll be talking about probably for the rest of our lives. It was so perfect. And whoever scripted that and however they did that, this is another sign of just the incredible execution of this campaign, the level that they're playing at, because that broke through last night. I mean, I went and looked at the place where I got that video for Hopium today, and it was already at like 7 million views, a single video post on Twitter, right? Which is enormous number of views in a very short period of time. Really proud of the campaign. And let me just, we have the town hall tonight. We're going to be producing the show before the town hall with the vice president. We talked a few weeks ago, Tara, about your sort of perceptions and feelings about her performance in all of this. I mean, she just did this great NBC News interview where she, again, was commanding and pushed back. Talk a little bit about, your perception of her and the strength and power that you're seeing coming from her in these closing weeks.
She's demonstrating her leadership and her ability to lead in every single moment. I mean, seeing her joy and her relaxed state commanding the rallies that she's in and holding the crowd and weaving between the serious stakes of this election and the need for joy and a vision for this country that is more representative and democratic and equitable has been incredible. And then pairing that with interviews, right, with traditional media and being able to really stand her ground on stuff and push back, right, and not taking the bait to try to, which honestly, most of the hard questions, if you will, from traditional media are really just Republican talking points, as we've talked about. And she's not taking any of that bait. I mean, she is saying definitively where she stands on issues. In the NBC interview, she said, no, there will be no exceptions for an issue about how a woman makes choices about her own body and family planning. That's really significant. So I just think that she is in command of her vision, of her campaign, and of what she will bring. And she's being her true self and bringing her true self to this. I also just have to bring up this light moment from one of her appearances with Liz Cheney, actually, this week.
Everybody I talk to says, I have to turn off the news. I can't read anything. I'm meditating. I'm doing yoga. I'm so anxious. I just don't even know. I'm eating gummies, all kinds of things, What are you doing? What are you doing?
Not eating gummies.
And it was honestly one of the most endearing moments I'd seen in a while. And I was like, I want to give that woman an edible when this is over. But I am so excited to vote for her and for her to be our first woman president. I have so much trust in her and faith in her from how she's run this campaign and stepped into this unbelievable uncharted territory and campaign. I just want to say one thing before we move on, though, about Tim Walz's great moment, because something that I think is really interesting about it is that the campaign has clearly made a strategic decision to really, really, really level up their informing voters and audiences about Elon Musk's really unprecedented role in Trump's campaign, right? Tim Walz called him Trump's running mate, right? Before he called him the dipshit, which was like cathartic for all of us. And I think this is important because I am obsessed with and very, very studied on low propensity, low turnout, and non-voters. And one of the common threads of the majority of people who don't vote often or, don't trust government or elections that much, but aren't very partisan, is this real sort of, there's a populist feeling, right? Where, they don't like dark money. They don't like the reasons we don't have like true democratic institutions and truly billionaires buying elections. That is unpopular. That is deeply unpopular. And that is what Elon Musk is doing. And I'm so grateful to see the campaign really lift that up for people, because there aren't many people in this country who want that, who want a government or a president bought and sold by billionaires or Russia. And so I'm glad that that is one of the dominant kind of narratives that's coming out right now, because Elon Musk is not a popular guy.
Yeah.
He has all the money in the world, but I really don't think people trust him, especially when it comes to politics and regulation. And so I think that's important.
It's a great point because, and we're going to be talking about this later, but just the scale of the games, the manipulation, the cheating that's going on is just so extraordinary. It's become core to the Republican thing. I mean, I think that they believe that they will always be a minority, that we are the majority party in America, and that for them to seize power, they have to use illiberal and anti-democratic means to do so, either that are blatantly illegal or things that are working the refs, whatever you want to call it. And the combination of the red wave polling and Elon doing direct vote buying, which is clearly illegal, by the way. He's taking illegal actions right now in this election.
And governors have written a letter to DOJ requesting an investigation into
right.
this. Right.
Republicans are asking, right. And we're going to be talking about these third party, the fraudulent effort to create a third party, what you've described as, this impulse that people have against the two-party system is being exploited by fraudulent candidates backed up by Republicans. I mean, just the fact that Fox News itself claims it's a news organization when we know it's really a Republican organization masquerading as a news organization. This issue of the fraudulent nature and the games that is played by the other side is something, to your point, that low propensity voters who want their country to work well and to government to be honest and forthright. This is a huge stain on the Republican Party. And I think that you're right. I mean, the engagement with Elon has been important. And I just want to close by saying, just my last observation is something you said. I just want to put an exclamation point on it, is that we've been around winning campaigns and losing campaigns, you and I. Right. And perhaps me being around more losing campaigns than you, because I've been in this a little bit longer. The Harris campaign looks and feels like a campaign that's winning, right? The confidence, the ambition, the spend, right? The vibes of the candidates, the confidence of Governor Walz taking on Elon the way he did, going to Texas.
The diversity of the surrogates, from Liz Cheney to Eminem,
right,
to Taylor Swift.
If this campaign was worried and terrified, it would look and feel completely different than what we're seeing right now. And this is a campaign that is strong and confident and is closing strong. It's confident that when they execute their plan, they're going to win this thing. And the other side, it was Rick Wilson had the greatest line about this, which is, playing chess with Trump. You'd sit down at a chessboard and you move your piece and Trump would start eating all the pieces, right? Like Trump is, ending in a very Trumpian, unbelievable mess. And I think my favorite moment of the whole week is Rudy Giuliani was ordered by a judge this week to turn over all of his assets, his cars, his penthouse apartment in New York City, all of the money that he has left, which isn't very much, memorabilia, everything is going to be turned over to these two women in Georgia that he defamed, who are now going to be living in a penthouse apartment in New York City, or at least own one in New York City.
They make money off of it or sell it.
Right, or sell it. But what
in their lives.
What a reminder of just the unbelievable Star Wars bar nature of the modern Trump MAGA party.
These are crooks. These are actually convicted felons.
Yeah.
It's crazy that we got to this point. And now we're very excited to be joined by Ramsey Reid, who's a senior advisor at the DNC, who has been really deeply focused on the third party threat in this election cycle. Ramsey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So start by telling us a little bit actually about what this role and your focus has been like the past year. And I know there have been a lot of changes to the third party candidates and potential candidates over the past year, and it's sort of ebbed and flowed. But I still personally have so much PTSD from 2016 when I was running all of the digital programs at Priorities USA, a major super PAC, and we were the only organization that was really tasked with trying to educate voters in the battleground states about the threat of Jill Stein in particular and other third-party candidates. Spoilers, and it was obviously too little too late, because Jill Stein did actually pull enough votes to be the margin between Trump and Clinton in a few states in that election. So I am constantly nervous about the role third-party candidates play, and especially around young people who might not be as educated about the Electoral College or how it works. And so just talk a little bit about how you perceive the third-party landscape and the role that it will or could play in this super close election.
Yeah, and you're right. It has changed and evolved over the course of the cycle, which is something that we definitely anticipated. But I think we entered the year with a very clear idea that there were serious threats posed by independent and third-party candidates. And it was unlike any recent cycle due to both the number of candidates and also the unique roles that they play. And so, we sought to build an operation that was national in scale, that could focus on holding them accountable to the same rules for ballot access that we have to play by, and to educate voters around the threat that they play and the risk that they have in, previously President Biden's reelection and now Vice President Harris's election. So that's what we've been focused on. And, I think the very initially, what we saw was Donald Trump's top donor, Timothy Mellon, giving huge sums of money to a super PAC for RFK Jr.'s ballot access. And that was really where we got started with this. And now we're really focused on educating voters around Jill Stein in particular and the risk that she plays to Kamala Harris's election.
Can you explain a little bit for our listeners too, sort of where it stands in terms of where third-party candidates, including Jill Stein, are on the ballot and where they're not? I know that is so much of the focus that you guys had up until this late point in the cycle, is just trying to, figure out where they are getting on the ballot, where they're not. It's different in each state, as I understand it, but it's complicated. So what's sort of the simplest way of understanding how third-party candidates get on the ballot and where Jill Stein and Cornel West and any other candidates you guys are tracking are on the ballot this cycle?
Yeah, so every state has different rules for how candidates get on the ballot, depending on what office they're running for and whether or not they're running as independents or as nominees of parties. And so for the third parties, I think that the simplest way to sort of explain where we are right now is in the battleground states. Jill Stein is on the ballot in almost all of them. She's not on the ballot in Nevada. Cornel West is on in a sort of a spotty set of states. He is not on the ballot in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. He was ruled ineligible in Georgia, although the Republican Secretary of State decided that they should print his name on the ballot anyways. And so we're dealing with this, I think, broadly across the battleground states, and there are candidates that voters need to be educated about generally in each of the states.
I wonder, so how do you think where are we now then, I guess, 13 days out? What's your assessment of how successful your effort's been? What should people be thinking about? What might happen here? Lightning did strike. The last two Republican presidents won their elections to a great degree because of the peeling off of third-party votes, Bush in 2000 and Trump in 2016. So, give us your assessment of how successful you've been, and what we should be thinking about in these last 13 days.
Well, I think what's most important and is top of mind for us is that it's going to be close. It appears like every battleground state is very close. And so when you are scrapping for every last possible vote, it's important to make sure that people understand that there are two candidates who have a path to victory, Harris and Trump. And you can't take a risk voting for Jill Stein or for third-party candidates and delivering Trump back to the White House. And so, I think in the context of where we started this year and where we are now, we've made a lot of progress. But as Tara mentioned, we're not going to take anything for granted, remembering what happened in 2016 and in 2000. And I think what's really worrying for us is the extent to which Republicans have gone to prop up these candidates. And that, I think, is what's really important for people to understand and to think about as they are, talking to family and friends and people that they know who might be considering voting for a third party candidate. Jill Stein in particular has hired Jay Sekulow as one of her lawyers, infamously Trump's former personal lawyer working on his impeachment proceedings. He's also chief legal counsel at ACLJ, which has done a ton of awful things, notably advocating for the implementation of Trump's Muslim ban. So I think we feel on one hand encouraged that it's close and that that there is not an overwhelming amount of enthusiasm for Jill Stein, to put it kindly, but we're not going to take anything for granted.
Can you talk a little bit more? We have talked in this show about what I call this sort of Republican fuckery, right? Which is this, the games that they play, the red waving of the polls, Elon trying to vote by, right? you only cheat if you're losing. You only cheat. The sign of all of this, the enormous effort, they try to run 3 candidates this time, not just, 1 or 2, right? Like there is a sign to me always of their weakness and not their strength, right? They wouldn't have to drop 80 polls into the poll averages if Donald Trump was winning the election, right? To try to make it look like that he's winning when he's not winning. Can you talk a little bit about just reflecting back on the fact that this has been so nakedly and brazen a Republican project, right? That it's the idea that these are independent or third-party candidates is in other political systems, these things would probably not be allowed because they're so brazenly naked a Republican project, all 3 of these efforts, right? And that there's really at the core of this essentially fraud, right? I mean, these are fraudulent campaigns. These are fraudulent offerings. There's very Trumpian levels of fraud going on here where these candidates are grossly misleading the public about what they're intending to do. They want to elect Donald Trump. They're not running for president. They're not running independent campaigns, right? And so just as somebody who's in the game every day, right, our party is so obsessed with playing by the rules, doing things properly, right, following campaign finance laws, being truthful to the American people. And then there's this stuff, which just seems so unbelievably over the top and brazenly, in our face fraud. And so I don't know, just throw it out.
No, it's shocking.
Yeah. Push back a little bit, but I just want to clarify to frame this up before you respond, Ramsey. I don't know necessarily, Ramsey, you would know better than I do, but I don't know necessarily that Cornel West or Jill Stein wants Trump to be president. I think that there is an element here of like being really, really, really intentional about having alternatives that come from the ethos of their campaigns. But it's actually the fuckery, excuse my language, of how Republicans leverage these campaigns, these independent campaigns and candidates, and how, frankly, foreign interference leverage them as wedges to be able to pull votes that I think voters are less informed about. But I at least with RFK Jr.'s campaign, and obviously what a wild ride that was, like, I believe that he genuinely was running to provide an alternative to the 2-party system and the 2 candidates. But maybe that was naive of me, Ramsey. But I just wanted to kind of say, I don't know that so many of these candidates are actually doing it for Trump or on behalf of Trump, but they are being pawns and tools in the Republican machine, the way that they're being leveraged. Is that an accurate assessment, or how would you see it, Ramsey?
Well, I would just look at the facts here. And those are that after Jill Stein helped deliver Trump in 2016 by winning more votes in the blue wall states than his margin, she said she didn't regret it. She's been asked multiple times about how she views her role in 2016 and is she worried about being the Ralph Nader of this election? And she considers it a great badge of honor, I think is what she said, to be compared to Ralph Nader. She says,
and I take back that defense entirely.
she was in she had a conversation with Mehdi Hassan where he said,
I'm just wondering, was during that disastrous Trump presidency, when kids were being kidnapped from their parents at the border, when people were dying en masse from COVID, when he was praising Nazis, doing domestic terrorism, as Butch says, did you ever at any point say, maybe I got that one wrong?
Oh, no.
And then she ran again. I think the New York Times wrote a story the other day where they reported that her own family, her adult sons, begged her not to run out of fears that she would spoil the election and deliver it back to Trump. And she turned them down.
Saw that with the Kennedys too. The entire Kennedy family came out again.
Exactly. So when you see how she viewed her role in 2016 and her intention to run again, and then you take on top of that the fact that she has hired Jay Sekulow, that she hired a Trump-aligned election-denying lawyer who tried to overturn the election results in 2020 in Wisconsin, that she has received help from Republican consultants for her ballot access, that she has hired consultants who were at the Capitol on January 6th. There is, in our view, no other way to see this than that she prefers Trump would be president than Harris, and that she views her role in this race as spoiling the election. So I don't think Jill Stein deserves a charitable interpretation of her actions. And I personally try and take a charitable view of almost everything because I think it helps me get through and just have like a positive day-to-day experience. But I don't think Jill Stein deserves charity in view of her intentions when you look at sort of a comprehensive view of what she said and how she thinks about her role in this race.
No, that's
Yeah,
so important. And then getting that information, though, in front of the voters who may not, right, have watched that Hassan interview or know this background or certainly know who she hired as her lawyers. How are you guys getting that information out there to the voters who might be susceptible to just believing, the face of her campaign as an alternative if they're not excited about the two primary candidates?
Well, it's important to do, and it's hard to do. It's hard to break through. And I think it's very clear to voters that she doesn't have a path to victory, and it's clear to the press. And so I think for candidates like Stein, it's hard to get coverage, but we have a really amazing team here. Liz Smith, in particular, has done a really amazing job making sure that people have an opportunity to learn about Jill Stein and can sort of decide for themselves. It is a fine line to walk between, elevating someone's profile and also exposing them and holding them accountable. And so I think we try and find a balance there. But I think her own words speak for themselves and the actions of Republicans. Trump himself at a rally in Philly in June said,
Jill Stein, I like her very much. You know why? She takes 100% from them.
And so that is really what we want people to understand, is that when you're voting for Jill Stein, you are actually voting for Donald Trump. That is what Donald Trump wants. That is what Steve Bannon wants. That is what Republican consultants want. And we think it's what Jill Stein wants too.
Well, and just to reinforce that, I mean, the idea that you could be the leader of the Green Party when Biden and Harris have done more to combat climate change than any two politicians in the history of the world. And Donald Trump is the core of his campaign is to roll back everything that they just did and to make the planet warm faster, and whose best allies are the petro dictators in Russia and Saudi Arabia. I mean, the notion that you could claim to have concerns about climate and sustainability and do anything other than be 100% behind Kamala Harris, given how openly aligned Trump is with petro interests and oil interests domestically and abroad, makes the lie even greater, right? I mean, if she was running in some kind of other independent moniker, that would be one thing. But it's why I think it's so important, I think, for people to recognize. And if you look at what she says, in addition to everything you said, I mean, all of her attacks are on her. She never attacks Trump over anything, despite his, incredible retrograde views about climate and energy and everything else. And so can you just talk about how you thread the needle a little bit more about not elevating, but also engaging? I think that's really an interesting thing I think people would benefit from, because I think it's really hard. I mean, I think, our instinct is always to go whole hog, right? And go into something, but you need to find this balance between lifting her up and elevating her, right? While informing people. So talk a little bit more about that, if you wouldn't.
Yeah, and also just quickly, your point on climate is really good. I mean, she watched Donald Trump remake the Supreme Court in the most conservative fashion possible, and they have picked apart essential regulations for stopping climate change, and she has no regret over that. And so it's very clear that she doesn't care about actually trying to solve, the climate challenge. She's really in it to help Trump. In terms of
the insidious part too, I saw that AOC video, which I really loved.
All you do is show up once every 4 years to speak to people who are justifiably pissed off, but you're just showing up once every 4 years to do that. You're not serious. You're not to me, it does not read as authentic. It reads as predatory.
That's so insidious that you're representing something that you're not truly. You really are a puppet. And because I do have empathy for people who are I hate the two-party system. I want more choices. There are a lot of democratic nations around the world that don't have just two parties. There are kind of more formidable other options. That's not really the case here. But to dupe those people into making them think that they're taking an alternative path that could spur a different kind of conversation around certain issues, but really just be a puppet and be for anti-regulatory candidates or Supreme Courts, that's just, it's so deceptive. That's what really frustrates me. But sorry to interrupt, Ramsey, to get to the question.
No, yeah, totally agree. And Simon, I think, the balance is really about making clear what kind of the most important things for voters to understand are, which is that she is backed by Republicans. She has no regret over 2016. And she is very clearly hurting Kamala Harris and attacking Kamala Harris with the intention to help Trump. And so we pick our spots very carefully on, what we choose to engage on. She operates as a candidate with the intent to try and hit Democrats and attack Democrats in ways that Trump cannot and doesn't. And so that means you have to be disciplined in how you engage someone who has no intention of trying to win a majority of the vote. She is not trying to get to 270 electoral college votes. Success for her is winning a couple of points in a handful of states that can tip the election to Trump. And so that means she takes she takes positions that are meant to try and divide a wedge between, people who are open to Harris and not to Trump. And so we have to be very careful in how we engage with someone who's not in it in a good faith way.
And I know we only have a minute or two left, and we're really grateful for your time, Ramsey, this close to the election. But if you could just spend 1 minute talking about Cornel West and his campaign, because I have even heard from some friends that they're looking into him. And, one of the bigger national news stories I recall from a number of months ago was actually that China was propping up Cornel West on social media in certain battleground states. So would love to hear from you just kind of how you guys are perceiving his name on the ticket and what voters are looking towards him, knowing that we don't have much time to tie it up. What states are you guys the most worried about, either West or Jill Stein pulling a significant, for them, obviously tiny, but significant enough share of votes that it could really tip the scales?
Cornel West is not particularly active in his campaign. He's not raising resources. He has not put together a real operation, and he's on the ballot because of this nationwide Republican effort to put him there. And there's been a lot of reporting from the AP and NBC and others around the extent to which Republican consultants have gone to evade campaign finance rules and to very quietly behind the scenes put him on the ballot. And that, I think, is a real concern and goes back to one of the questions that Simon had earlier. In terms of where we're concerned, I think broadly the election is going to be close. All of the battleground states look really close. There are candidates, on the ballot in each of them. And so I think for us, we view each of them as important, and that if you live in any of those states, you need to be very careful in considering, the choice that you have. And if you're voting for Stein or for West, you're voting for Trump. And that's, I think, the message that we want people to understand in any of those states.
So for folks listening, if you know people in any of the battleground states, and especially Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, but if you know young people that are not excited about the two tickets and they think that this could be an option, telling them that is a vote for Trump, I think I totally agree, Ramsey. That is the most important message. Thank you so much for joining us. I really wanted to have you on to have this conversation because I don't think we talk about the third party threat enough. And it was one of the many, many, many deep cuts that led to Trump winning in 2016. So it's just so important. So we're really grateful that you and Liz and the rest of the team have been focused on this. It makes me sleep better at night. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Ramsey, for your good work. We've got a great guest, Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada. Part of the reason we asked her to come on today is that in 2022, she ran and won what was a very close election. And given that we are now yet again in another close election, we really wanted to get her perspective on how things are going from the ground. Give us a sense of how things are going. And thanks so much for taking the time to be with us in this final 2 weeks.
Absolutely. First of all, Simon, thank you. And believe me, I think I have said to so many people, you've got to read your columns, listen to your podcast. You're one of the very few that understands Nevada and what's happening here, because it's hard to read to Nevada, and that's normal. That's how Nevada has always been, and that's why it's a swing state. But let me just say, right now we are doing what we do best as Democrats here. It's our ground game. It's organizing, and we organize our way to victory. We knock on doors. We're talking to voters, and for everybody who's listening, those polls, those Insta polls, they do not know Nevada, and they usually get it wrong. But how we know what's going on the ground is when our voters and our canvassers are out there knocking on doors, and we hear from voters themselves. And I feel really good where we are for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, as well as for our ticket here in Nevada with Jackie Rosen and many of our congressionals, including our state house, as well as the down ballot. But let me just say a couple of things. Over the last few years, including in my race after the pandemic, in Nevada, we implemented new voting opportunities. We always had early voting in Nevada, where you could literally go to a mall, go to a public library, you can go somewhere and vote in person. And most Nevadans did that. 60% of Nevadans did that. And traditionally, they were more Democrats, because Democrats would early vote, and Republicans, who are in our rural areas mainly, would wait till election day. So we could always gauge who has voted and whether they were D's or R's. That was also at a time when we had just as registered voters, a major party of Democrats, major party of Republicans, and very few that were nonpartisan or other. In the last 4 years, that has changed since the pandemic. Because of automatic voter registration in the state of Nevada, more voters through the DMV are registered as nonpartisans. And then because of the pandemic, we implemented mail-in voting. You can vote by mail now. And this will be the first presidential race where we have implemented all of those new voting opportunities. And we have now a third of our registered voters are nonpartisans. And actually, I want to say even more than that, there are more nonpartisans registered voters than there are D's and R's now. So the whole dynamic here has changed. This election right now will set the baseline. And it's going to be down to the wire. It will be within the margins. And it will be a race that the nonpartisans are going to make a difference. For everybody who's listening, in my race, that was the same when I won in my midterm just recently. And the nonpartisans broke my way. They leaned Democrat, and they broke my way over 10 points, and that's why I won. So it is too early to tell. I know there's a lot of misinformation out there. Every time one of our counties provides the data on the mail-in or in person, a news organization will pick it up and write a story. Oh no, the R's are outperforming the D's, or the D's are outperforming the R. There's no D firewall. It is too early to tell. There were so many articles that came out just yesterday, Simon, and Washoe County, which is Reno, hadn't even reported until just today their mail-in ballots. So there's too much information that the reporters are just national news and the news organizations are picking up, and they're not getting the full picture because all of our 17 counties, they're reporting their data at different times. And whether it's mail-in ballot or in person, they're coming in at different times. So it's too early to tell right now. And the only thing I can tell you is that it's going to be down to the wire, and the nonpartisans in this state are going to make a difference. And traditionally, they have leaned towards Democrats because they care about the issues that we're talking to them about. Those kind of bread and butter issues about prices and lowering prices for families, for the cost of housing in the state, cost of groceries, along with safe communities, keeping their communities safe, and ensuring we're addressing reproductive freedom for women, which is a majority of Nevadans support that in this state. And I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, nonpartisan, a majority of them support that. Along with all of that is the immigration issue. That is boiled up to the top. And then, my gosh, what Trump did with not supporting the peaceful transfer of power has really undermined our democracy. And there's so many Nevadans that care about that, including from Republicans and nonpartisans. So there's still a lot of issues that so many of our electeds, including Kamala Harris, they're talking to our voters now about. And they're paying attention now. This is the time our voters in Nevada pay attention. Prior to summer, they won't, but now's the time. And so they're looking for those canvassers at the door. They're looking to talk to people. They're waiting to hear the candidates themselves. Kamala Harris has been here. Tim Walz has been here. They've had their surrogates here. Everybody's been talking to our voters. And that is the strength here. And that's why I am confident that it will be a close race, but Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they will win.
Well, and a couple bits of data for people that don't know the state, because it's an unusual state, is that between 2016 and 2020, 40% of the voters who voted in 2020 in Nevada had not lived there in 2016. And part of what that means is that these grassroots work that you do and all the door-to-door stuff that we're doing is hugely important, more so in this state almost than any other state in the country, because you have so many new people that are new, because the turnover in Las Vegas in particular is so high. And so this door-to-door work is really meaningful in a state like this. And the second data point, as the senator said, is that the NPAs, the nonpartisan registrants, are going to be more democratic this time, because we didn't have a presidential primary. And a lot of these people who were automatically registered didn't have to register as Democrats. They didn't have an action enforcing mechanism. And And so there's a hidden Democratic vote. There's always this hidden Democratic vote in the nonpartisan registrants. But it will probably be, based on a lot of work we've been doing, even bigger than last time. And that stuff's not showing up in the DNR numbers that are coming out in the early days. And then talk a little bit about the Senate race. I mean, it seems like we're in a strong position there.
Yeah, for Jackie Rosen, who is up for her reelection, she has done everything what she needs to do, getting out into the state, talking to everybody. She's been up on the air, and she is talking to our voters and reaching them where they are. People forget in Nevada is a majority minority state, meaning we have almost 30% are Latinos of our population. We have one of the fastest growing AA Pacific Islander population. And we also have a very strong African American community. We have 28 tribal communities, federally recognized tribes here in the state. We have a very strong white collar, 14% are union organized, skilled trade, our service industry, the culinary. So it is a very diverse mix. And that matters in this state. When you are talking to the people, you reach them where they are and you talk to them and you give them the ability to engage, even if there's language barriers. So Simon, let me give you an example. When people go to vote in Nevada, they can vote in English, Spanish, or Tagalog, because a lot of our AAPI community are Filipinos. And so part of our conversation with our voters here is showing up where they are and talking to them. And the canvassers right now, we have been knocking on doors since April. We have over thousands of volunteers. We have knocked over 800,000 doors.
Wow, that's amazing.
The strength of our ground game really is what pulls the candidates, and including the presidentials, over the finish line this time. And again, that's why I say I have a better sense of what voters are doing here in Nevada when I hear what they're saying at the door, instead of these Insta polls that come in, or these reporting that is done by news organizations based on the latest number that has come in from a rural county, even though it's not the entire picture of who has voted at that time.
Well, and just to put an exclamation point on that, this is one of the hardest states to poll because of the diversity of the population, how young it is, also the transient nature, the turnover that happens. And so you've seen two states this cycle where the polling had been wild and all over the place. And it's been yours and Arizona, right? Places with large numbers of Latino voters that are also harder to reach, particularly the Spanish speakers. And so, we went through this in 2022 in your race. The polling was crazy. The public polling in your race was so bonkers and so bad. And you ended up, closing strong and winning this thing. And I think that, what I've been hearing from everyone on the ground I've been talking to is people feel like things are even better this time than they were in 2020 at this point, or in 2022. And so there's a lot of optimism on the ground from folks that I'm talking to. And so, Senator, I know you got to go. You're going to go out and help us close strong out there. Any final parting words for everybody?
No, I think everybody the goal here now is to do the work and organize. Anybody who wants to come and knock on doors, anybody who wants to help us cure ballots, anybody who else wants to help us in a swing state like Nevada make a difference, reach out to us. We'll put you to work. But it's just, from my perspective, and I think, Simon, you're right, the energy level that I feel here was even more energy than in my midterm where I won. The excitement, what is happening on the ground here is going to make the difference here in Nevada. So I am confident.
Everybody, we got this race is close, and we just got to we got to work as hard as we can. The way I like to say this is we're winning, but we haven't won yet. And we need to go win this thing in the next 13 days. We got to leave it all on the playing field. And I hope that whatever you do, donate, postcard, phone call, whatever it is, do more of it. Let's go win this thing together. This has been an awesome series, Tara. I've had a lot of fun with you and your team. And why don't you close it out here?
As you know best, Simon, hope is a really powerful force. So I'm really grateful for all of the hope that you're bringing into the ecosystem and certainly into my vibes right now. But I think we just have to remember, as you always say, do more, worry less. The worrying doesn't help. So if you're feeling the anxiety because this is a close race, it is a scary prospect. For us to lose in any way, shape, or form, then channel that into doing all of the things. Sign up for Hopium Chronicles if you haven't. Share COURIER content on your socials. Talk to your friends and neighbors. We've got just a handful of days to get this done. So thank you, Simon, and I'll see you out there.